If you'd walked into that room in June 2010, you would have probably phoned Taggart. It looked like there'd been a murder. I knew I hadn't killed him because he was still begging me to stop. But I had been there to do a job. I was a paid enforcer, and I went there to do what I'd been paid to do. Now, my life wasn't always like this. I grew up in a very poor farming background, and we lived out in the countryside out beside Tarvis. And my dad was an alcoholic. He suffered with alcohol, and he dealt with alcohol. But we had a very, very tough upbringing. We were poor, and we had nothing. And I lived my life being with hand-me-downs and basically being treated like I was a poor child. And that meant going through school that I was bullied the whole way through school. All the way through primary school, I went into secondary school and I was bullied there at Inverurie. And then we left to move up to Forres, where I stayed for several years, and I was bullied through school there as well. And at the age of 14, 15, I decided I had enough. Nobody was going to bully me anymore. I left school with no qualifications, and I started working in a farm. And I got involved with a group of guys called the Young Farmers, and I found that I had a life then. I had some people who actually understood me and who appreciated me and respected me. But the problem was at the age of 15 I found alcohol and I started drinking, which wasn't a problem to begin with, but very shortly afterwards I was getting ready to go for a night out with some friends, and as we got in the cars to head out, I had a call of nature and needed to go to the toilet, and my mates left in one car and the second car waited for me. And as we were travelling to go to where we're going, we came across this accident at the side of the road. And that evening I stood and watched 5 of my friends burn to death in a car, and I listened to them scream. And from that day onwards, I struggled to blank it out, how to hide it, how do you cope with this? And I found that I had a good friend in vodka. Vodka was that was my medicine. And very, very quickly I was living on a bottle of vodka a day. I was having half in the morning before I could cope to go to work, and the other half at night to make me go to sleep. And I never realised I had a problem. That was just my life, because that was Monday to Friday. The problem came when I came to the weekends, because I didn't need one bottle, I needed 3 bottles just to have a social life. And life was a mess. It was just absolute turmoil. And then one night when I was out, I got involved in a fight, and my grandfather had been a boxer in the Navy, and he had taught me at a younger age how to fight. And this night when I started fighting, it became messy, and the doorman in the nightclub offered me a job because they told me they would rather have fought with them than against them. So quickly I started working in the nightclubs and became a bouncer, but I then realised I'd gone from being a bully, from being bullied to being the bully, and I had power. I had something I'd never had in my life, that I had respect, I had power, and people actually were afraid of me. And I used this to my best advantage, which I'm not proud of, but I very quickly became a thug. And life carried on like this. I was fighting my way through life and battling through life and trying the best I could to crawl my way through life. I had gone through several different jobs in different places, but I always seemed to end up working the doors and doing security work. And then I moved to Blackpool to escape away from everything. I thought it'd be easier in Blackpool to live there than it was to live here. But the only work I could find was security work. And when I was doing the doors in Blackpool, it's quite ironic, I worked in a nightclub called Heaven and Hell. And as I was working one night in the club, there was a fight. And I got a radio call through my earpiece to run to this fight on the 3rd floor. And when I got there, there was this massive, huge black man who was fighting with the doorman. And I'm never scared of a challenge. I just grabbed this guy and I was dragging him down the stairs. And as I got him to the front door, he told me he was going to come back and shoot me. Now, years of working the doors, I've heard drunken tongues through idle gestures, and I didn't bother. I didn't even think about it until 15 minutes later, when I was standing speaking to this girl at the door, and something caught my eye and I moved. And as I moved, there was this huge bang, and something hit me in the back of the head. And we all felt the floor, and when I looked up, there was a hole in the wall where the man had come back and shot where I was standing at. And that's when I realised that this guy had seriously tried to take me out. This guy had came to shoot me, and I thought I was lucky. And all through my life, I thought when things happened, I was lucky, and I never realised just how much I trusted in luck. And after that situation, I felt like I had to leave Blackpool. I moved back, and I moved back to Peterhead, where my family had all been. And I moved back here and realised that there was very little work for me here, and I ended up back working in nightclubs. I became the manager of a nightclub, a very successful nightclub, and I was a manager of that for 12 years. I ended up having my own pub for 2 years, and I thought I was invincible. Nothing could touch me. Nobody could harm me. I was invincible. I went through life just thinking that I could do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, and I got away with it. And then I realised that life started to fall apart. My life just started to crumble, and things were happening, and situations were arising that I couldn't cope with. And for a while, I actually think I dealt with a bit of mental health, and I suffered with mental health for a while. But it all came to a head when my first marriage collapsed, and my wife and children, and we split. And I really struggled with life then to see a way through life. And I carried on for a few months like this, and one day I was helping a friend, and as I was helping him to do his stuff, this woman walked in, and she was absolutely stunning. And I'm thinking, wow, what an amazing woman. And I'm trying all the chat-up lines to get to speak to her and giving her all the patter, and nothing was working. And I remember saying to her, wow, can I take you out on Saturday night? She says, I don't go out on Saturday nights. I was like, wow, why not? And she says 3 words that was going to hit me in the face like a brick. She says, I'm a Christian. And I was like, wow, I'm out of here, I'm done. I have nothing to do with this. I'm not interested in Christianity. Don't believe in God. And it was like, no. But there was something about this woman that made me keep wanting to speak to her. And over a case of a couple of weeks, we kept bumping into each other, and we became friends, and we would we would speak to each other, and she would invite me for my supper because I had nowhere else to go. And then one day she says to me, would you want to come to church? And I was like, you've not a chance I will ever set foot in church. There's no way I'm coming to church. But then she said she used blackmail, because she told me, she says, if you come, do you want to come for your lunch on Sunday? And I was like, oh yeah, a bit of roast beef, yeah, I'll come. But we're going to church first. And my belly got the better of me, and I went to church. And I felt like a fish out of water. I knew exactly how people feel like when they say they walk into situations and they just feel like everybody's staring at them and everybody's looking at them. But then I realised that for the first time in my life, people were being nice to me. People were actually being genuinely nice. But I was having none of it. I wasn't going back to church. It wasn't for me. But a few weeks later, something else arose, and the children were doing something, and I went along to church again. And it was like people were nice again, but no, there was no way I was going to church. I wasn't doing this thing. I wasn't being brainwashed. There was no way. And life then took a change, because me and my friend decided that we had never been on a boys' holiday. We were going to go on a lads' holiday, and we would go somewhere wild. So the two of us picked the cheapest holiday we could find to Ibiza, and me and my mate went away to Ibiza, and we'd have a week, and we partied like the earth was going to end. We partied so hard for a week, and on the 6th day, my mate says to me, he says, I'm broken, I'm done. He says, I'm going to my bed. And I was like, well, I'm going partying. And I went out and I partied that night, and then life hit me. The realisation that I was coming home the next day hit me, and I went for a walk, and I ended up sitting at Cafe Mambo to watch the sunrise, and it comes up between two islands. And as I'm sitting there, this man appeared in front of me, and he looked like a beggar. He was very, very unkempt. He had dirty clothes, looked like he was wearing rags, and long hair, unshaven. I'm like, whoa, sorry pal, I've no money. And he says, I don't want your money. I was like, wow, okay. He says, I'm a street preacher. And I was like, whoa, don't even go with the church stuff. I says, I've looked at it, not interested. Church is not for me. And he says, I've got a message for you. And I'm like, what? He says, I've got a message for you. It's like, okay, on you go. And he says, quite clearly he said it. He said, when he asks you to wear his coat, put it on. And I'm like, what? He says, when he asks you to wear his coat, put it on. And I looked away thinking, wow, this is weird. And I looked back, and the guy was gone. There was nobody there. As far as you could see, there was nobody there. And I'm like, oh no, I've drunk too much, or I've been spiked, or something like that. I thought I'd gone crazy. It's like, this is nuts. So I went back and went to my bed. And the following night, me and my mate sat We were going to go partying. And we decided that we'd rather have a cup of tea and a cheeseburger, and we sat and we spoke about life, and I'm sitting there, and the whole time I couldn't get this image of this guy on the beach out of my head. So I flew home, and on the flight home I decided that I'd had enough of my life the way it was. I phoned my boss and I handed him the keys to the nightclub, and I left my job and decided I was done. I was having no more of it. And then I went to see my friend to tell her what I'd done. And I was quite shocked, because rather than telling me, oh, you're stupid, you're daft, what a crazy thing to do, she went, don't worry, she says, God will provide. And I'm like, I don't even believe in God, so how can God provide? But it stuck in my head that she told me God would provide. And then she says to me, oh, but you're not working this weekend, so it means you can come to church on Sunday. And I had no excuse. I had no excuse not to go to church. So when I went along to church on Sunday morning, I sat in the church, and the local pastor got up, and he stood and he says, I've got some announcements to make. He says, firstly, our church picnic is next month, and I'd like to thank Sandy Garvock for offering to wear the sweetie coat. And I almost fell off a chair, because all I heard him saying was he'd asked me to wear the coat. And the sweetie coat is a coat that's covered in sweets that someone wears, and the children chase after you around the park to get it. But that wasn't irrelevant at all. It was the fact that somebody had asked me to wear the coat. And I went and spoke to him and asked him why he'd said me. And he says, I don't know. He says, because I wasn't going to say you. But he says, I felt God told me it was going to be you. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. And nobody knew about this man on the beach. But I still ignored it. I never listened. I just couldn't see that God was speaking to me. So I carried on for a couple of months after that. And it came up just before Christmas. And I remember sitting thinking, ooh, wow, what do I want for Christmas? And I remember Janice saying to me, she says, what would you like for your Christmas? And the first thing that came into my head was for you to be my wife. And she went, yeah, it's a good idea. So within 11 weeks we got married. And everybody thought we were crazy getting married so quickly, but I was scared that Janice was going to change her mind. But we did, we got married, but still something wasn't right. Something wasn't right in my life. And I never realised it was the fact that I didn't know Jesus. I didn't have a relationship with Jesus. I thought I had everything because I had this wonderful marriage and everything was right, but there was still something there right. And I can remember there was one week I started to feel really ill, and I had this pain in my leg, and the pain got worse and worse and worse, and a swelling appeared at the top of my leg, and I ended up in hospital with this. And I remember the nurses coming round and telling me, she says, oh, there's an infection in your body. She says, the gland in your leg has caught this infection. She went, and we can treat that. I was like, oh great, this is finally some good news. And she went, yeah, but I've got some bad news. She says, we've checked your bloods over and over again, she says, and you're diabetic. You're going to have to inject insulin on a daily basis. And I'm like, wow, no way. My life was just falling apart again, just when I thought it was getting better. And I came out of hospital. They told me that I had to go on the Monday to go and see my doctor to do some more blood tests so that he could sort my diet and for insulin checking and stuff. And I remember sitting in the house on the Saturday and Janice saying, you have to go to church tomorrow because the church has been praying for you. And I'm sitting there going, what a waste of time. Prayers may help me. Look where I'm at. But I went to keep the peace, really. And I walked into church and I sat there. And as the pastor got up, he started to speak about how God had sent his son and how his son was Jesus, and Jesus came to earth, and Jesus walked this earth for us, and how that through the cross, Jesus died on this cross to take away our sin, and how that everybody's sin can be taken away as long as you make a relationship with Jesus. And as he's speaking, I started to feel sick, and I had this horrible sick feeling, and I was burning up inside, and I was sweating. I was like, Janice, I have to go home. But the more that the pastor Neil spoke, the more I sat and I listened, and I felt sick and I was burning. And then he says, all you have to do to have a relationship with Jesus is allow him into your heart. All you have to do is give him permission to come into your heart, and he will transform your life. He'll change whatever situation you're in. And at that moment, I put my hand up and I cried. And for the first time in my life, I cried in public. I was 35 years of age, and I sat there and I cried my heart out. And I felt this rush come from the soles of my feet, go all the way through my body and out through the tips of my fingers. And then I remember feeling an amazing sense of peace. I'd never felt peace in my life. I'd always had some sort of turmoil or drama or some sort of thing going on inside my head. That I felt this peace. It was just silence, and it was weird. It's so weird to explain, but I can only explain it as peace. So I'd gone home, and it was like, wow. Again, I could sit, and it was just nothing was going on. It was just this amazing feeling. The next day, I went to my doctor's, and I went in to get my blood test done. And the doctor took my bloods 5 times, and he came back every time, and he says, I don't know why you're here. He says, your blood's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with your blood. And I can remember sitting there, and it was like a penny dropped in my head. And I says to him, I know what happened. And he was like, what do you mean? I says, God healed me. And I told him the story about how the day before I'd gone to church, and I was saved in church, and I'd made this connection with Jesus. And he says, that's crazy. No, I don't believe that. And I was like, well, I do. And life started to change just from that moment onwards. I've been a Christian for 5.5 years now, and I have never once raised my fists in anger. I've never once raised my voice in anger. And I can't get angry. I can't physically get angry. I have had no issues with my blood whatsoever. And it's just this amazing feeling that God transformed my life that day. And life just hasn't been easy. It's been a roller coaster, but I then realised quickly through my story and my testimony that life can be transformed. And the first time I realised this, I went to Ireland to work, because I was working as a hydraulic engineer, and I went to Ireland to a small village called Cloggerhead. And while I was there, I met this guy in the pub, because we were sitting watching the football in the pub. And this Irish man came over and he says to me, why are you in a pub in Ireland drinking Coca-Cola? And I'm like, because I'm driving. And he was like, all right, I thought you were a holy kind of guy. And I was like, no, but can I buy you a drink? And I sat with this guy and I asked him his story. And this is when I realised the power of testimony, because this man sat and he told me about how he'd been a fisherman for all his life. And 15 years previous to this day meeting him, he had lost his fishing boat. The fishing industry had collapsed. He lost his boat. He turned to alcohol. Both his sons had left the house. They didn't want nothing to do with him. His marriage fell apart. And he was sitting telling me that his life was a mess. And then I turned to him and says, I have a very similar story, but my life's no longer a mess because I found a way out of it. And I told him about how my testimony, how God had changed my life. And he just laughed at me. But as I left him my phone number and says, if you ever need me, call me. And a week later, when I was back home, I was getting ready to go and share my testimony at our local church in Peterhead. And I received a text message, and it says, hi, you don't know me, but you met my dad in Cloggerhead last week. And for the first time in 15 years, my dad came to my house sober. We went to church and we both were saved. And I grabbed, because this guy's life had been transformed. And that night I went and shared my testimony at our local church, and my dad, who had refused to come anywhere near church, came to hear me share my testimony. And my dad left the church saying he swore he would never come back again. And a week later my dad walked back into church and my dad got saved. And life was starting to get transformed through hearing my story and how God had used me and God was using me how to do this. And I've been on a journey where I have travelled to the Philippines and shared testimony. I've shared testimony all over Scotland, and I keep sharing testimony, but wherever I go and share testimony, God uses my testimony to transform lives, and people's lives are changed. And it's remarkable how God puts you into places that you can do this and you can change lives. And God has now put me in my position where I'm working for the Fisherman's Mission, where on a daily basis I get to speak to people and I get to help transform lives and share the love of what God has done for me. And recently I was speaking to someone and I told them that there's so many people in life who travel through life going in one direction and don't realise they're lost because they never realised where they were going to. And it's not until you realise where you're supposed to be in life that you realise that you're lost. And it's a huge thing because so many people travel through day-to-day life and didn't realise that they're lost until God actually steps into your life to show you that he stood right next to you the whole time. All you had to do was look in the opposite direction and you'd find that God's there. And that was massive for me, to realise that God is actually there, and that He's there all the time for you. And just before I finish, I want to share a wee story about how you can't guarantee there's tomorrow. Recently I had a gentleman who came to see me at my work, and he'd battled with alcohol for 40 years. And I shared my testimony with him of how God had changed my life. And through me sharing my testimony with this gentleman, he decided he needed Jesus again in his life. And he reconnected to Jesus there with me. And it was an amazing moment to sit and pray with him and have him pray with me. And as he left, he thanked me, and he told me that he'd never felt such an amazing peace with God. And then he left me. Half an hour later, he sent me a text message to say, "Thank you so much for this afternoon. I have never felt this amount of peace with God." And I was like, wow, this is remarkable. This is brilliant. And then I never heard a thing from him until a week later, when I received a message from someone to say that they'd found his body. And it turns out that he actually died that evening after he had given his life back to Jesus. And it totally highlights the fact that we never know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so many people are saying that, "Oh, I'll give my life back to Jesus when it's the right time." But there isn't a right time. Apart from now, the right time is now. And if you're listening to this, I'd really encourage you, just have a look at it. Go and see what church is like now. If you've been put off by churches, go and see what a church is like now. Because there's no guarantee that we have tomorrow.